Okay, what we're looking at here is um, the adaptation of the terrain, the attempted legislation of modularity, and designated things uh, to have designated shapes. And the reason this is a operational desire is that it creates a system that is repeatable and sustainable. What we're looking at here is the reality of for one thing, the hills and the contours of the hills. This isn't something that we really considered before. Now, when we had 1 inch tall or 1 inch thick hills that had slopes, we had the slopes, you know, basically coming out about 3/4 to 1 inch away from the top level. So just as you're seeing it here, but here it's a little bit more computer graphic. It's a little bit more less, sculpted. It's just series of levels put on top of each other, and that's what we're talking about here. So what happens is when you have this kind of modularity, the fields are a set size. The hills are a set size. We call those the legal hills. Any other hill shape is not going to be legal. In other words, we only want to use the hill shapes that we've created that for the most part can be used in the majority of games, so that you don't have 100 different shapes because there's 100 different battles and the hills are never the same. But what we're trying to do is make a sustainable terrain system by having legal shapes. And these are the legal shapes that we've decided upon. A ridge like this. There's also a ridge that is just connecting hexes like this. And then there's the the 2-hex connection. And fields that are a set size. There are going to be no other fields. And we're even doubting whether there should be any other fence lines at all. Why? Because the existence of fence lines jutting out from other pieces willy-nilly throughout, because that's what was in the battle or that is what's meant for the scenario, brings with it a whole bunch of unknowns, problems, interpretations, and so on. But with the fields being bordered and in a set size, there's no question. The fields are where they are. The fences are there. If there's a road, for instance, like there's a road over here following this tree line, should there want to be a fence line following that road, the fact is there isn't one. Because even if it were like Emmitsburg Road in Gettysburg where the fence line followed, the fact of the matter is we are not going to go that far. Because if it's a field, then make it a full field. Don't just make it a fence line. It's going to have a fence, and at some point in the distance, there's going to be another fence, at least in America. So you're going to have a fence line, and then in the distance, there's going to be another fence line. There may not be a horizontal, but there's 2 verticals, at least. So like this, for instance, this is a vertical and a vertical in your perspective. And these are 2 horizontals. Or I said it wrong. But anyway, you get the idea. Perpendiculars. So if there's going to be a fence along a road, then this is the fence. It's going to have this part up against the road, but in the distance is going to be this part of it. It just is what it is. Because you can't go on making battle after battle with these roads and rivers and these fields, and they just go everywhere. It's difficult to replicate. And I know you say, well, there's hexagons. It shouldn't be that difficult. Yeah, well, it is. You just want to make it easy to throw something up and not think about it. That's it. Just throw it on the game table and not think about it. And that's kind of like what's going on here. We want to have, this is 2.5 inches from flat to flat. But when we created the one level, then the second level, then the third and the fourth level, we began to realize all these hills are said to be about, if they're a significant hill, they're about the height of a barn. Okay? And so this is it. And we have these different levels. But as the levels get wider and wider and wider, you start to see something you may not seen before. Because you used to have just a straight up edge. But now you've got a contour. Something's different. Look here. This hill's slope comes right up to the fence. So in your mind's eye, look at what this looks like. Close your eyes and imagine you've just walked into this field from over here. You're walking, kind of like I did at Gettysburg, following the Confederate advance across the field. And you're coming up to the fence. And then as you get over the fence, guess what? You've got a slope right in front of you going up 100, well, not 100. Say it's 50 feet. As tall as a barn. I don't know how big a barn is. Say it's 50 feet. That's a 50-foot hill. And as soon as you get over that fence, I got to climb up this hill. And it doesn't matter how steep it is. We've shown it this way. You could say it's steep because we can't get carried away. You don't want to have a level and then 2 inches away another level and then 3 inches away another level and so on, because that would be impossible. You'd run out of room and all of your fence lines would have to be mounted on fabric in order to accommodate that kind of a reality. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that it's more work. If you wanted to represent a hill with contours that came flying out a distance away from it, like way out here, maybe this hill is there at its highest point, but its contours, its slope is very gradual. So the slope starts way out here. Okay, so we've got 1 level, 2 levels, then 3 levels, and then the 4th level. You could do that, but all these things would have to be on fabric to conform to that shape that's underneath it. And right now, these are all cardboard. It is true. We were successful in experimenting by putting fence line glued, hot glued, in sections to a fabric. So a cloth field. And that was fine. Because as you drape the cloth, the fence, because it's not rigid, it's in pieces, bends as you need to have it conform to the hill gradation underneath it. Shadow Creek. And this was one of the most significant battles we've ever played in our miniature hobby. And it generated a lot of the stuff we're seeing today at imagineimage.org. A lot of the maps that we are seeing came from that campaign. And so when we made, when the terrain was laid out, we put the hills in position, but they weren't contoured at the time. But look at now. All of a sudden, something we didn't realize has happened. We are now able to see, because remember, we used to have hills that were just straight box. Straight, 1 inch thick. But this is now a gradual slope. Sharp as it may be, it's still gradual. So it extends out away from the top hex. So it's kind of interesting. We didn't realize this before. This is a very congested valley. In the game we played, these hills were just where they are, but we didn't think about the fact that a slope was sloping down to the forest, and then immediately when you got through the forest, sloping up. So just like Shiloh, this is a cut or a rut or a creek that is probably running in here, which gives rise to the valley, the fact that it's a little valley. There could be a creek in there, and because we actually don't show it. This over here is the area of Shadow Creek. So Shadow Creek was like this. This, by the way, at this point right here is where General Stonewall Jackson died in the battle. But this is a valley. And it turns out, and the reason this is called the core of Shadow Creek, this is the main battle area that actually transpired. As it transpired, this was the main battle area. And right here in this area was a massive tangle, melee after melee, just as we have read in so many Civil War battle reports, changing sides over, ebbing and flowing, rallying and coming back. This actually happened in this battle. But over here was a horrible series of attacks and charges and casualties and artillery being attacked by infantry and the crews being overwhelmed and then being and pushed back and run away from the guns being captured and then recaptured by other Confederate forces. Now that would have been it. There were no other Confederate reserves at the point where the Confederates took back those guns on top of this hill. But at the time the Union made, what we called it is a very interesting defensive move. They attacked. So in the actual battle, they attacked from the Miller farm here, this direction, toward the Confederate lines. And of course, got decimated. But it was a spoiling attack. And it really did halt the Confederate advance. The Confederates attempted at the same time that they were advancing in this area to advance up this road and over. And what you don't see is my pointer will be like here up this way. There was a big ridge and there was a battle going on there, but it was kind of diversionary. The two sides were both diverting attacks and defenses, defending in that area above this map. But the Confederate main force then tried to advance down this road and flank all the units. And it was moderately successful, but it ended up not winning. It was not fully successful. In other words, it got to about here, and then it got stopped. There was just a ridiculous amount of hand-to-hand combat going on in here. I've never seen anything like that. I've never today seen any battle that was like Shadow Creek, which is the reason why we are so fond of it. Because it was scary, horrendous, and fascinating, and extremely fun at the same time, if you can imagine that. But the battle went on to see a great deal of Union reinforcements coming in from the north. Let's see if I got that right. I believe the South was attacking north. So coming from the north was a great deal of Union reserves. And that ended the battle. But it was, again, one of the most rewarding things we've ever done. But anyway, so what we're looking at here is the essentially the use of contoured shapes around the sides of the hills that are the legal hills, but then we've added contour after contour after contour to make them sloped, and to understand that there is an area occupied by that hill that is disruptive. So in other words, trying to imagine putting guys in here, putting guys in here, and putting guys in here. That's not exactly an easy thing to do because these guys are walking at an angle. Now, I don't know. We don't really know. We're just assuming that this is a representation of the slope. But the slope could go from here, all the way to there. So we're just showing it like this. But it could be huge. So this could be flat, but hey, not so flat. You've got regiments. If your regiments are on here, fine if they're pointing, this direction. But if they're pointing, this way, the guys are half, at an angle. Their footing is challenged. If they're faced, lining up this way, but facing this direction, but they're lined up against the slope, see? So that's the point. And as you see, by the way, I wanted to point this out. We have our little forest representation hex underneath the trees. So we can always pull them away and put the unit, whatever units are there on there. So there we are. That is our situation. This is the core of Shadow Creek. And we'll be hopefully documenting this, playing the game soon enough. It's a 2x2 battle, so it's a compressed concept. It will be interesting and vicious, we hope.